Hello everyone, STheHero here. In this video I'll be going over the best items for every tank in set 14. While you may not need to prioritize the absolute best items for tanks every single game, understanding how different frontliners interact with different item combinations is an incredibly important skill for growth in TFT. All of this info can be found on my site, tftanomalies.com, under the Set 14 section, which I'll constantly update throughout the set. Because I'm a vigorous planner and theorycrafter, I always have a good understanding of the upcoming meta trends, and often find things before anyone else. So, if you want to be ahead of the curve, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. It really helps out a lot. The last thing I want to talk about is tanks, which is a bit of a complicated topic. So the way that units have their best in slots is like pretty unique. I mean, it's like this in every set, but I think people don't think about what is truly best on each of these units. The way each unit wants to be built is actually very different depending on the type of units. Like all these different tanks have different scalings and synergies that how you itemize them has a lot of like flexibility. Obviously, you're just going to build the best items you can in your given spots. But if you had the ability to choose, it's important to know what you want to look for when given the ability to do so. So we'll talk about all these. Okay. So, for instance, Alistar, he's a bruiser, which gives him health. His passive gives him damage reduction, scaling with AP. His active doesn't contribute to tankiness. It just does magic damage and it stuns. Alistar's tank values in his health from bruiser and in his damage reduction. As a result, Alistar wants supporting things to those things. So he has good AP scaling on his damage reduction. Especially early, he can reduce a lot of damage and become really tanky. So he actually has a good need for AP. And then because he's a bruiser, he doesn't have a lot of resists. So you need a good source of resists. Because the best way to maximize tankiness is to try to incorporate the stats that you're missing into your build. I've talked about this before with stat multiplication in a previous video, but yeah. So essentially, you want resists because Alistar doesn't have resists. He has damage reduction, but that's like separate. That's like an extra thing. And then apart from that, you want a supporting item. I think what I have here is Redemption, and the reason for that is because Redemption is broken, and also it increases his max health by healing him. So it gives Alistar a better chance for lasting longer into the fights, because every time you heal, it's effectively gaining max health, or it's effectively gaining health. Dr. Mundo is a Street Demon Bruiser Slayer. Street Demon and Bruiser give him health, and then Slayer gives him Omnivamp and AD. Mundo's pretty weird in that his ability sucks at giving him health without Slayer active, and I'll talk about that with the scalings. Passively, Mundo gets more max health from all sources, which has a good synergy with Street Demon and with Bruiser, but also with like a lot of augments like cooking pots or like investment strategy. Anything that gives flat health, it's really good. Active heals, and if you look at this number is like really low, and then deal bonus physical damage to the current targets. I mean, that number's also low, but I mean we'll talk about why. So, or the heal base is really low. So obviously this is meant to cater to the fact that Mundo is a Slayer. So they want you to have the Omnivamp from Slayer, and they want the damage that he does to heal him. So that would give him more health. So like half of it is like in the ability, but then half of it's from him doing damage and healing off of it. However, there's a lot of comps where you aren't going to have Slayer active because you're not playing around that. So as a result, it makes Mundo just feel really bad. So you're supposed to have Slayer active to maximize Mundo's effectiveness, but most of the time you aren't going to do that. Oh, and another thing I want to talk about is Adaptive Helm, just as an item. This item is really, really underrated. So what it does is it gives AP, mana, magic resist for the front. Okay, it's broken specifically on frontliners. On backliners, it's like, I think appropriately rated, but as a frontline tank item, it is really underrated. So in the front two rows, you get 40 more armor and magic resist, meaning the item gives 60 magic resist and 40 armor. In addition, they gain 1 mana when struck by an attack. Not every unit can use this well because a lot of units are mana locked during their ability, meaning while they're casting their ability, they're not generating mana. But units that aren't mana locked during their ability typically includes units that heal or do something instantly. So Alistar will do damage and stun them, and then immediately go back to generating mana. So he's not going to be mana locked for very long. He'll be mana locked for like 0.5 seconds to 1 second, which means he can actually generate mana pretty frequently with this item. And then this also gives him, like I said, 60 magic resist, 40 armor, which is a lot of defensive stats. In comparison, Gargoyle Stone Plates, you need to be targeted by like 3 units to get like equivalent value, and you don't have the mana and the mana passive and the AP. You have like 100 health, but it's not anything crazy. So you don't have to be solo frontline. So Mundo similarly can benefit from Adaptive Helm, but because he has this bonus scaling from health, I would imagine that you would probably just want like to all in on max health, something like this. Originally, I thought that Warmogs would probably be the best fit because it has a lot of base health and it gives like more health scaling and it just all multiplies together. But because Mundo doesn't heal very much on his ability, he probably wants something like this. I think that would probably provide more actual value, because if you don't have Slayer active, like, he doesn't heal much, and then over the course of combat, if this procs like twice, that's basically the same amount of value as having a Warmogs anyway. So while also being AoE and giving damage reduction and starting mana. Jax is a shielder, Bastion, Exotech. Exotech gives health. I think not too many comps would play 7 Exotech with tank Jax. It's just the point where Exotech actually gives a lot of base health. I guess they both 5, but like at 7 he'd have 600, which would be a lot. More often he'd be played Bastion, which is just armor match resist, but he has a lot of tools. His ability is a shield, and it does damage. The shield only scales with AP. It has a pretty good scaling, I would say. Because he's shielded for 4 seconds, he cannot benefit from Adaptive Helm because he's mana locked while he's shielded. Any spell that has a duration, you're mana locked for. So over those 4 seconds, you cannot generate mana unless the shield's broken. So for that reason, I wouldn't build Adaptive Helm. Also, if you're 6 Bastion, you probably don't need those stats very much. So what Jax does benefit a lot from is from AP. So the thing with Crown Guard is that it gives a little bit of health, but a lot of the value is in having AP. Well, it starts with a max health shield, which is effectively 25% max health. But when the thing expires, you have a total of 45 AP, which means you're effectively increasing your spell's shielding by 45%. So every time he shields from his ability, he's actually getting like let's say 50%. A 2-star Jax would be healing would be shielding for about 200 more each cast, which adds up. If you're main tanking Jax, if he casts like twice, that's like already a noticeable increase. Between that and the max health shield at the start of combat, that's already more than a Warmogs. So, and it keeps scaling. Because Jax has synergy with both armor and magic resist and health, something that's pretty broken in general is healing. Healing's really good with shields because while you're shielded, your health isn't being lowered. So if you heal during that window, you kind of have the chance to go infinite, depending on how big your shields are. But it gives you a buffer to be more tanky. Like, you get more time to get your healing off. So having healing is really valuable. And then another thing that's unique about Jax is that he has this Exotech item. Now you can build any of the Exotech tank items, but this one is kind of just broken because it has really high base health and it does respectable damage. The other one is also like pretty good. This one, which I'll just put on Mordekaiser for now because that's his item. But this one gives less base health, but it increases the effectiveness of shields and it gives more shielding. Both of these are very good on Jax. If you have either of these as your Exotech item, they would probably go onto your Jax, assuming you are playing around Jax main tank, which is what you would care about BIS for. If you're not playing them main tank, you don't really care about BIS. But yeah, so the third item, or I guess realistically your first item, but it would be one of these two. The other tank option is this one, but I don't think it has as good synergy with Jax in particular. However, if you get it, I mean, it would still go onto Jax / your main Exotech tank. This one I would say is meant for Sejuani the most. It's also okay on Mordekaiser. Poppy is a Bastion as well. She's a cyber boss, which gives her max health and gives her AP. So she actually has a bit of everything. Most often going to be played around 6 Bastion though, which is armored magic resist trait. She'll have more of that than with the other two. Because of that, I think what I have is like all in on shielding more, all in on healing. So what's unique about Poppy is that she has armor scaling on her ability, but also that her ability targets the furthest enemy, meaning that you can hit a backliner. It's not super off. I don't think it's actually like high enough of a ratio that you can one shot them, but you can maybe, if she casts twice, you can maybe two shot the backliner. So if they're like cornered and you're positioned correctly, you can kill the enemy carry with Poppy, which is pretty nice. So I like Protector's Vow to live up to that dream just because it gives her starting mana, it gives her a shield. When the shield procs, she gets 40 more armor, so the item gives 40 armor total, which contributes to her damage. While she is shielded, she can't benefit from Adaptive Helm, so otherwise I would have just put Adaptive Helm on her. And then, because she's a Bastion and because she has healing, or because she's shielding, Redemption is good on her. Protector's Vow can be like Sunfire or something as well, depending on your comp. Poppy herself is not like super tanky. Her shield is good, but it's not anything crazy. I mean, she had a recent buff that made her spell like made it so that she gets her shield faster. Because before she got her shield, she had to shoot a projectile, and then the projectile had to go back to her, and that took like a lot of time. So this might make her tankier, but all in all, her best in slots would probably be something like this. Silas is an Anima Squad Vanguard. Anima Squad gives a little bit of armored magic resist, and then Vanguard gives shields. So his ability gives him max health and does damage. So anytime I see max health, I mean, first of all, I think about how much AP I can take for this to go infinite. But second of all, I just think like, what scales best with max health? More max health scaling. His base damage is not very high, but it scales with like being tanky. I think the generic options would be something like this. But if you want to make him cast more, an argument can be made for like double Adaptive Helm, as that would probably make him cast more and gain more max health over the course of combat, while also giving 120 magic resist and 80 armor, which is a lot in comparison. This is 65 armor, this is 75 magic resist. The other thing though is that these have percent bonus max health. This has the damage, and then this has the regen. Not crazy amounts, but makes it arguable as to what you would want. Because it's a max health thing, like I said, he can benefit from Adaptive Helm, so like if you want to do that, that's be fine. But I think having a more traditional, I would probably say this is better, but it's like close. His AP ratios aren't high enough to warrant building Crown Guard. There's an argument to be made for sure. Vi is a Cypher Vanguard. Cypher is just AD and AP. Vanguard is shielding. Vi's cast gives a shield and then does damage. This shield scales pretty well with both AP and health. Or it scales okay with AP and it does okay with health. But it also does pretty good damage. It has a 500 base AD. So I think what's like pretty unique about Vi is that true best in slots would probably have a Titans on her, because it contributes both to AD and AP. But I think going more into like a bruiser build isn't like enough. I think Vi doesn't do enough damage to be like, or to be a damage dealer. So I think realistically you want to give Vi a source of max health and like healing. You could go with more resists, but Titans technically is like a resist item because she has a shield. Adaptive Pump isn't like worthwhile because she's gonna be mana locked. But the shield ratio with health is pretty high, so something like Warmogs is a lot of value. Redemption is just always good. As you can see, Redemption is just always good. I think when in doubt, Redemption is going to be good, but there are a couple cases where you might not need it. This being one of them. Darius is a... Okay, so he's a bruiser, and he's a syndicate. Syndicate gives max health, and bruiser gives percent max health. His ability heals him for a little bit, and then does damage, and his ability sunders. When he has the syndicate Kingpin bonus, his ability range is increased, and he heals more for enemy hit. I think what's pretty underrated is that his ability can hit a lot of units, and he can thus heal a lot from hitting all these units. Because his ability heals, he's not mana locked. Like, he's gonna get his spin off, and then he's gonna get back to generating mana. So adaptive helm actually is quite valuable on him. And the other thing is that, okay, Crown Guard isn't valuable on him because his AP ratio is not very high, but his heal scales with max health. The base has 5%, and then the Kingpin bonus is 2%. If he hits a lot of units with the Kingpin, like extra range, that could be like the Kingpin is like per target. So if you hit like 4 units, that's 8% max health. So that means your ability in total has 13% max health healing. That's pretty good. So having more max health is pretty valuable. Because he's healing, I would probably say having the max health is a bit more valuable than having a redemption. However, it is arguable, for sure. But because like it technically scales well with max health, I think it is fine to have this like that. Next we have Echo. Echo is a Street Demon strategist. Street Demon gives max health. Strategist gives damage reduction. First time we see strategist. Damage reduction being in the front row. Strategist gets triple, so at 2 he gets 12% damage reduction. And at 5 he gets 30%, which can be pretty good. Echo's ability heals and does damage. Pretty generic. Echo's ability has pretty good AP ratio, so he's a pretty good candidate for Crown Guard. And then he also has a heal, which doesn't mana lock him, which means he's a good candidate for Adaptive Helm. So what many people don't realize is that true BIS for Echo is probably gonna look something like this, where he'll generate a lot of mana very frequently. He has a lot of resists from Adaptive Helm and Crown Guard, and then Crown Guard and Adaptive Helm increase his AP, which makes him heal more, which makes him more tanky over the course of combat. I know this like definitely looks weird, but it is probably correct. The other argument would just be to be like, oh, like you want to prioritize utility items, and obviously, like if you want to prioritize utility items, like that's fine. But if we're talking about BIS for the units themselves, it's probably this. Alawi is in the exact same situation. Her traits gives a little bit of armor and then more armor. Because of this, the incentive to build more armor matches isn't as high, but she doesn't have health scaling, so she isn't like super incentivized to have more stuff. I think because she has so much armor innately, you'd probably want to go like health, but you're gonna get more value from health by building AP, in all honesty. So, and the other thing is that Alawi is most often played as a tank for Anima Squad, where she isn't actually going to have much more than 2 Bastion active ever. So, in that case, it's actually okay to build more armor naturalist. If you were to play around Vertical Bastion with Alawi as a tank, which there are very few setups where that would be correct. Maybe in like a setup playing around with like a Vagar reroll. I don't know if like a 6 Bastion Bane would be a thing, but that could also be a possibility. But because she doesn't actually ever get much Bastion in while she's being the main tank, I think her Bastion stats look similar to Echo's, where because she's healing, she's not mana locked for very long, so she's going to generate mana more frequently. She's got a lot of resistances and a lot of AP and a lot of healing. Okay, Rost is interesting. I think he's now kind of similar to Vi, because I think they buffed his damage ratio. What do I have for Rost here? Just normal damage, like the normal thing. His ability heals and does bonus physical damage. His heal has a health ratio. He is incentivized to build health. I think realistically it's something like this. Obviously, in most cases where Ross is being built as a tank, you're probably going to have like an Evan Shroud, and that's perfectly fine. Like you're just going to give him all the utility items, because Ross serves as a tank for like Vayne sometimes, or like for executioners or for whatever. So that's like the real, like what realistically you're gonna build. But if you're looking for like BIS, what makes Ross like as tanky as possible, it's probably just this. I don't know if the damage buffs make you want to build like a Titans like with Vi or not. But for now, I'm just gonna stick with this, because this would make Ross the tankiest he would be. There could be an argument for like this. Honestly, more resists makes him cast more. His ability's healing, but he's like knocking them up into the air, so he's like kind of channeling. So because of that, I wouldn't lean that way. The other arguments could be like redemption over that, which could be viable. Shyvana is a Nitro Bastion techie. Nitro doesn't do anything. Bastion is armor magic resist. Techie is AP scaling. Shyvana, her first cast gives her healing over time and damage over time, And then every time she casts, she gets max health and she gets damage amp. Shyvana just wants to be living and casting as much as possible. I think her presence slot would probably look something like, yeah, this gives her the resists and makes her cast faster, which gives her more max health and more everything. Her AP ratio isn't like super high, so I wouldn't look to give her a crown guard. But yeah, this build gives her more max health and then makes her really tanky and she can cast more. Skarner is a Boombot Vanguard. Boombot is a damage trait. Vanguard is a shielding trait. He gains a shield and then does damage scaling with armor. This doesn't scale super high. Skarner is really strong as a tank just because he can do a lot of retaliation damage through Boombot. So if you put tank items on him, as he gets damaged, he's just going to do a lot of damage for free. But in general, you're just looking for pretty generic tank items. I think because he shields, Redemption has more value. But in all honesty, like, Redemption just might have value anyway over other options. But for the most tanky version of Skarner, I would have probably something like this. Because he's shielding, he can't benefit from Adaptive Helm, and because his AP ratio isn't like super crazy high, I wouldn't really give him Crown Guard. I mean, it's not bad actually, but it's not bad. But like it's lower than like Jax and Poppy, and probably Vi. So like, yeah. Braum is a Syndicate Vanguard. Syndicate gives health, Vanguard gives shield. His ability gives him a shield that scales with max health and does damage. His Kingpin bonus gives him armor magic resist and more damage. It scales with like armor and magic resist. He's shielding, so he's not really benefiting from Adaptive Helm. And then Crown Guard is in like a similar situation to Skarner, where it's like the ratio isn't like that high. Like it's good, but it's not like that high. So I would just give him the same items. Skarner, which is it gives him armor magic resist and healing, which has valuable with shields. Galio is a Cypher Bastion. Cypher is a damage trait. Bastion is armor magic resist. I don't think there's any Bastion comps with Galio. Actually, there is. There's Draven. That's the only one where he's Galio main tank. And actually, you can go 6 Bastion in that. But I do think there is quite a lot of value in having certain stats. His ability gives durability and channels and then heals. Because of the channel, I would say Adaptive Helm probably doesn't have that much value. I do think Crown Guard, I think I underrated on him. And then for the rest of the items, it would probably just be like Crown Guard Redemption, and like probably something like this. If you're gonna go 6 Bastion. I think this was buffed. It honestly might be like a double Crown Guard angle. I think now it's like 600 or something at 3-star. If you're playing around Bastion, this is probably correct. If you're not, it would probably be like Gunblade or something. The other thing is that by nature of Galio's kits, he's actually very good at being solo frontline. So he could also be like one of these. I don't know if like which is better here. Like I think he's kind of designed to be around that, but I'm not going to think about that right now. So I think all in on AP to give him more durability and more healing. Assuming you have Bastion for your resists. Gragas is a Divinicore Bruiser. Divinicore gives a bit of everything. Bruiser gives health. He's most often played around Bruiser, but he can still get some C as a flex unit. His heal's like respectable and does some damage. He has scaling with max health. This one's like a bit tricky. I think realistically it's probably like another one of these. Because it's a heal, he's not mana locked for very long, so I think this is probably... The other thing is that if you're playing around the vertical Bruiser, having the healing from Dragon's Claw in particular is actually pretty valuable. So in actuality, best in class probably looking something like this. In contrast, Darius isn't played in vertical Bruiser. I think he's the Bruiser that you drop. Gragas, you can definitely play around him with Fiddlesticks, and you can definitely play around him with like other 3-roll setups. The generic trio of items here. There might be an argument for Redemption, but as a Bruiser, I think he should be Warmogs. J4 is, I think, interesting because I think people don't know how to build this unit. His AP ratio is actually pretty high if he hits enough units. He's a Golden Ox, which doesn't do anything. Vanguard, which is a shield, and Slayer, which is Omnivamp, which is a little bit of sustain. I think J4 is, because he shields, he's going to be mana locked, so you don't want Adaptive Helm. AP ratio is good, so I give him Crown Guard, and then he just wants resists, so something like this would be good. Also a pretty good user of like Redemption. If you wanted to go for something like this, that can also work. But a lot of the time you can have a supporting unit provide those like redemption. I'll still put it here. The other thing is that by nature of the comps that J-Force played in, there's actually like a bit of argument for having this Evan Shroud here as like best in slots. The actual tank stats it gives is like not bad, but they only last the first 15 seconds. But the Sunder synergizes with one, the units he's played with, and two, the armor shred of his passive. Like you're just providing a ton of utility. So realistically, it makes sense to put that on J4, but I like this better than Gargoyle. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. Mordekaiser, he is a Exotech Bruiser Techie. Exotech gives max health, Bruiser gives percent max health, Techie gives AP. Mordekaiser's ability, despite being a Bruiser Exotech, he does not scale with health, so he actually doesn't have incentive to build health. He does have a lot of incentive to build AP. If you're not playing around Vertical Techie, you should build AP on him, specifically a Crown Guard. Mordekaiser also has access to this Exotech item. This one's meant for him. It buffs shields, and then he gets more shields from... So this item actually does scale with max health, however, I don't think you should be worrying about building more max health for this. I think you're not always going to get this item. I think the general game plan is that in Techie Mordekaiser, you just want resists and healing, and in not Techie versions, you want AP. So because he's a shielder, he can't really build Adaptive Helm. So it would probably be something like this. But Crown Guard also has like a lot of value in non-techie setups because his AP ratio is really high. Both for shield and for damage, actually, now that I think about it. Like this for techie, this is for sure the setup, and then for Bruiser, I'm not really sure. Cho'Gath is a Boombop Bruiser. Cho'Gath is notorious for his max health scaling. Okay, like the thing is bugged out here, but basically he gains a lot of max health and he gets bigger and he becomes a problem. For Cho'Gath, you probably just want to all in on max health in any way, shape, or form. However, I think Redemption's also broken, so resists plus Redemption. However, there's one other thing to keep in mind, which is the fact that he heals, which means he can cast more. Another tidbit is that because you want him to stack while not being damaged for like you want to center him and you want to give him time to stack max health before he's like your only tank left. So by the time that he's being attacked, he's like has a lot of extra max health. So for this reason, Steadfast Heart actually has a lot of value because it keeps him above the threshold. Like he can keep himself above the thresholds better than other units can. So I think this is a pretty underrated item for him. And this, and obviously that helps him ramp faster. So Leanna's like pretty interesting in that she has like really weird scaling. She's Anima Squad, Vanguard. Anima Squad, tiny bit of resists. Vanguard giving her shields. Her ability gives her durability and has a magic resist scaling on hit. It does. Her build is like pretty awkward. I would probably just say it's like this though. It's like she has the durability, so she's not a adaptive helm user. Nico is a street demon strategist. She has health and she has damage reduction. She has durability from strategist. I think pretty generically just wants the same items. Her shield makes her a bad adaptive helm candidate. Her AP ratio is not all that high. Plus she gets AP from straight demons, so that's probably why her AP ratio is not that high. She has an okay health ratio, but I think she just wants the redemption healing and resists. So these are her items. And then Sejuani is pretty interesting in that she is not very tanky. She's an Exotech Bastion. Exotech gives her health, and Bastion gives her armored magic resist. She passively gets more armored magic resist from all sources. Her ability is just a stun. She has access to this Cybercall item, which it gives her armored magic resist, which is boosted by her passive, and it makes it so that her abilities and attacks mark enemies and she heals off of damage to those targets. This has really good synergy with her casting as much as possible. It also has synergy with like a lot of the units that she's played with, like Zeri, for instance, who can help her do a lot of damage to, like, can help heal her by doing damage to marked targets. So I think what is conventionally considered her BIS is something like this, where you're just all ending on the first cast and then her healing a bit off from like the other like redemption and all that stuff, and from like the passive of Cyber Coil. I think if you are confident in her like longevity, if you think she's gonna be able to cast multiple times, I think this might be better because she's like, I don't think she's mana locked in those 2 seconds. I think she can start generating mana faster, and Adaptive Helm actually will help her get it to a second cast a lot. Well, it also contributes the same amounts to a first cast because it also has the starting mana. So with these two starting items, you have 95 starting mana, and then if you want a second cast, Adaptive Helm is for sure the way to go, while also being buffed by her passive and all this stuff. But realistically, it's a toss-up between the two. And then finally we have Zac, who's the only 5-cost like tank, I would say. I mean, Kabuko's like kind of a tank, but I think Zac is like more of a pure tank. What's unique about Zac is that at 10% health, he splits into 2 copies with 50% health, so he effectively has 2 lives. He can spread effects pretty well, and a lot of these effects are like utility items. So you have 2 routes, which is the pure tank route and the utility route, which both of which are I think are fine. As a pure tank, probably want something like this. And then utility route, because you have 2 Zacs, you can double proc Ionic, you can spread Sunfire faster if needed. I think stuff like Vow was supposed to work, but it doesn't. I don't think what other, like, there aren't that many things you can proc with the double Zac that like you would actually care about. I guess Bramble Vest you would care about. That's like a bit extra damage. I think for like actual tank value, this is the best build. So because the 2 Zacs will also heal each other with each other's redemptions, so that's like double healing. And Zac's passive is Virus. His only trait is Virus, and what it does is he can get these bloblets that permanently increase his max health and his ability power. So his healing and his max health are permanently scaling if you keep collecting the bloblets. So he's gonna have a lot of max health, and he's gonna have a lot of base damage and healing, or he's gonna have a lot of AP that scales his damage and healing. So you want to complement with the stats that he does not have, which is resists, and then redemption is just his own scaling healing, so it'll scale better than Warmogs would. But yeah, that is every tank itemization